Hello, we're here for Chapter 3B. For me, in my classrooms, we're going to start with argument patterns on page 79 in Dr. Vaughn's Power of Critical Thinking, Chapter 3. And just for a little overview, we're going to talk today about argument patterns. The valid ones especially, Dr. Vaughn goes into about a page and a half of. These are the invalid forms, and here's why. Go ahead and look at that. What I want us to focus on is being able to identify valid patterns, so then anything that's not one of those patterns ends up being invalid. Okay, makes a little sense. The other thing we're going to talk about today is totally different from that, and it's called diagramming arguments. It's not as bad as it sounds. It's not like diagramming sentences, so don't stress. Just a little reminder, deductive arguments, and that's what we're going to be focusing on for the rest of the chapter, and honestly until we get to Chapter 8. Deductive arguments are definite, okay? We know that they give us conclusive evidence, they can have a valid or invalid structure, and they can be sound or failed in the way of their content, truth, whether we should accept them or not, okay? A couple of other things about deductive arguments that are very important for us to know. One is, if my premises are true, then my conclusion has to be true. Okay? That's kind of our mantra when it comes to deductive arguments. If my premises are true, my conclusion has to be true. And a lot of times we try to overthink things. Of course, there could be other information, other ideas, other explanations for the phenomenon we're trying to look at. But given the things on the page, if those things are true, then my conclusion has to be true. That's a deductive argument. Now, we also have some issues when it comes to the difference between structure and content. Because we use the word valid to mean true out and about in our everyday lives, we tend to conflate those two things. Not a good idea when it comes to deductive argument, when it comes to logic class. So keep those things separated in your head. Content is not the same thing as structure. Now, they are definitely intimately related. We use the content to figure out the structure. We use the structure to see if we should buy the content. But for all of our purposes, they are not the same thing. They help each other out, they're intermingled with each other, but they're not the same thing, okay? So those are our two big pieces for deductive arguments. Now, for these other pieces, what we're going to do, I'm going to give you some examples and show you how they work, okay? That's most of what our patterns are going to be. Pattern and structure, same thing, okay? So for argument patterns, we're going to look at things that are valid, okay? So this is, you're always going to have true premises lead to true conclusions. Okay, that's what we're trying to get at. And so the first one I'm going to show you is this first item here, modus ponens. Okay, and I have this really silly little argument. If there's chocolate in the house, I am happy. Okay, that's my first premise. Second premise. There's chocolate in the house. My conclusion, therefore, I am happy. Again, not a fabulously thought out or complex kind of structure or argument at all, but it does give me a little bit of room to work with, okay? It's easier to see the structure if we're not too worried about the content. So I have a few little indicator kind of words, if, and then, and therefore. They don't really count in what I'm going to show you here because the most important thing, and this is a crucial sentence on page 79, first sentence in the second paragraph, since argument forms, structures, are structures distinct from argument content, We can easily signify different forms by using letters to represent statements in the arguments. Now you can use letters, you can use numbers, you can use shapes, you can use colors, you can change a whole sentence or a paragraph into one noun and be done. Whatever works for you, whatever makes the most sense to you, it doesn't get in your way of understanding the argument. Basically, we're creating a shorthand, okay? So in this case, I'm going to take this first section, this first sentence that says, there's chocolate in the house. Now remember, we need statements for premises. Statements are sentences, okay, but they are sentences that assert something is or is not the case. They're also easy to evaluate whether they're true or false. We can evaluate, we can judge whether there's chocolate in my house. Go look in the pantry. It's the third shelf down, pretty much. There's chocolate in the house, so I'm going to call this P. Why do we start with P? It's a Greek thing. Greek and Roman argument, classical argument, always did phi to start with. So we keep the P, not a big deal. My next sentence, my next statement, I am happy. A little bit harder to evaluate, but ask a few questions, you can kind of figure it out. That's my Q, okay? Easy stuff so far. Now, I have this new sentence, there's chocolate in the house, but it's the same thing I had before. And here is the hardest part, most important part of shorthanding these arguments. You have to label or change the same statement into the same thing all the time. I can't just decide this is Z. It has to still be P, okay? Last one, the same thing. Therefore, I am happy. I've seen that before. It's my Q, okay? So when I'm done, I have all of my statements boxed in, labeled, however you want to call it, okay? So I have penguins and quail, if you need nouns, green and orange, pink, P's and Q's. It works, okay? So I have if P, then Q, my first piece. My second premise, just a P. My conclusion, therefore Q, okay? This structure, if P then Q, P, therefore Q, is always valid. Always, 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 no matter where you see it, okay? It's always valid. Now, there's a couple other things I want to show you on here. I need to get this other, I wish I had a different color. This first sentence, my first premise, my if-then, that if-then is called a conditional statement, okay? That whole big thing is a conditional. And easy to understand, there's a condition for the second part to be true. I can't just be happy, okay? There has to be chocolate in the house. If there's chocolate in the house, then I'm happy. It's that conditional, it's reliant upon each other, okay? The first section, the if part, is called an antecedent. You can read that. Antecedent, and all that means is this comes first, okay? Antecedent, come before, okay? Second piece is the consequence. Consequent, sorry. The consequent, we know things like consequences, right? We do something, there's a consequence, whether it's good or bad, okay? The second thing, okay, consequent, the next sequence, second thing. Those things are just definitions. Don't let them get in the way of you understanding the actual argument, okay? Putting things in pieces. It does come in handy when you're talking about valid and invalid structures. In this case, okay, in this lovely little structure, which is valid all the time, okay, this is called affirming, basically saying yes to, affirming the antecedent. It's also called, our first one there, modus ponens, okay? I just abbreviated MP. Now, in typical Dr. Vaughn fashion, he goes through and says, oh, here's this Latin term, but you don't really have to know it. But then he goes and uses it the whole rest of the book. So, yeah, you do kind of have to know it. So in this case, if P then Q, here's my antecedent, I say yes. Okay? That particular format is valid all the time. Okay? So if my two premises are true, then my conclusion has to be true. Okay? Not too horrible. We have a few more to look at. We're going to get there. Let's see. I need purple. Okay? So I'm not going to write that all out over again. I'm just going to leave my conditional up there because I'm going to use the same argument all the time. If you're taking notes, I'm blabbing so you can keep on writing. Okay? So if there's chocolate in the house, then I'm happy. New pieces, I am not happy. Therefore, there is no chocolate in the house. Okay? Now, I get to do the same thing all over again. Let's see if I can mimic here. Okay, again, I have my therefore. That's my conclusion. It's important to find. Okay, so I am not happy. I've seen that before, except with this. Okay, watch out for the nots. They don't change the variable, but they do add the word in. Okay, we're going to get to those in a little bit. Okay, so I am not happy is still a Q. There's no chocolate in the house. Got my no there. That's still a P. But I have to remember to put the nots in. That's important. I know. Weird, but important. So again, my little guy is if P then Q, not Q, therefore not P. Okay? Now it's very important to remember the P's and Q's stand for particular statements. They're not just random. It does matter which one comes first. It does matter whether you have a not or not. It's kind of weird. This is very precise. Remember, everything we do with deductive arguments, very precise. The same way all the time. Okay? So if you're like me and you're a little bit OCD, works really well. Okay. So this one, okay, not Q, that's my consequent. Okay, I'm denying, I'm saying no to the consequent. This is also modus tollens. Okay, MT. This is also valid every time you see it. Okay, so every time you see an argument that has this format, it's valid. It may not be true, remember. That's the second piece, but it's valid. Okay, so if P then Q, not Q, therefore not P. We're denying the consequent in that second premise, and that makes us valid. Modus tollens, denying the consequent. Okay, not so horrible. A little weird, but not horrible. Okay, onward. 2 more to go. One more like these, and then one that's different, and then some other stuff that's really different. Keep us on our toes. Okay, so the next piece, we've done modus ponens, we've done modus tollens, hypothetical syllogism. Okay, the hypothetical syllogism is basically 3 conditional statements stacked on top of each other, 2 premises and a conclusion. Okay, it's a 3-part argument. I'm going to keep my first one. If there's chocolate in the house, then I'm happy. Okay? So then I'm going to start another conditional. If I am happy, then I make dinner. Therefore, if there's chocolate in the house, then I make dinner. This actually came true this week. My poor husband. Okay, so I have to go through and do my normal stuff. So my little if then, therefore, if, then. So I have 3 if-thens, but the way they line up is important. Okay, I'm going to go through and play with these other pieces. Let's see, can we do red? Yeah, we might as well. Okay, so I have my peas. There's chocolate in the house. Okay, here's my other one. That's a pea. I'm happy is my Q. Label him up. And now I have 2 other pieces. Okay, I make dinner. Hopefully that's enough different from the pink, you can see that. R, because we're going P, Q, R. Okay, at least we know our alphabet a little bit. I make dinner is my R. Okay, so I have if P, then Q, like normal. I have if Q, then R. So I have penguins. If I have penguins, then I have quail. If I have quail, then I have rabbits. Therefore, if, ooh, sorry, that was bad. If P, then R. That's my argument. This structure is always valid, but it has to be this structure. Remember, we're talking about deductive, so it has to be precise. It has to be the same way all the time, okay? This is our hypothetical syllogism, or a theoretical syllogism, okay? It's a valid structure. What you have to watch out for is that you have six spots, right? You have an if and a then in all 3 sentences. So the way this works out is you have to be able to kind of cross out the Q's. Now you can switch your P's and R's and all that as long as you end up with a Q on one side and a Q on the other as far as the center part goes. You end up being able to cross them out. Briefly go back to algebra class. Remember this, if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C, because you can cross those out and you get the same idea. That's kind of how this works as well. Okay, so keep in mind that you have to have all 3 pieces twice. You can't have the same one twice in the same sentence, because that would be weird. If I'm happy, I'm happy. Okay, that's kind of strange. But you can also only have one of these and one of these in the end result here. Everything has to show up twice. Nobody can show up 3 times. Okay, so that's how that works. Again, it's a deductive argument, so it has to be very precise. It shows up the same way all the time. Okay, so far, not too horrible. Now, the last one that we're going to look at, as far as structures go, is a disjunctive syllogism. And a disjunctive is basically a sentence that uses or. Okay, in this case, either or you have to make a choice. Only one can be there at a time. Okay, I'm not sure how many more ways I can say that, but we're going to play with that a little bit. I'm going to get rid of all of this because we get choices. A little bit different. It's not a conditional. It's the only one in this chapter that starts out as not a conditional. It doesn't start out if then. It starts out either or. Okay, so this is a disjunctive syllogism. It's the only one that's different, and it starts out either we have cupcakes or we have chocolate. I'm all about chocolate. Okay? That's my set. That's my very first premise. Either we have cupcakes or we have chocolate. Okay? We have cupcakes. Yay. Therefore, we don't have chocolate. Darn. supposed to know. Okay? That's my whole argument. Now, we can write this a few different ways, but we're going to kind of play with it a little bit. Either, or, therefore. A lot of times we leave off the either. Okay? Either, you can say it either way. Either we have cupcakes or we have chocolate. That's my first premise. And so I have a couple of different pieces, right, to look at here. So we have cupcakes. Again, I'm going to label it with a P. I go here. My whole second premise is we have cupcakes, so that's my P. We have chocolate. That's my Q. Here, we don't have chocolate. Don't forget the not, okay? So I have a lovely little thing here. I have either P or Q. That's my first premise, right? My second premise is just P. My conclusion says, therefore, not Q. This is always valid. Okay? As long as we have one of the variables as a positive and the other as a not. Okay? So we can actually write this 4 different ways. I know, a little bit weird, but I'm going to do it anyway. Okay, I can change my 2 pieces here 4 different ways. Start out with my either or the same way all the time. So here I say, okay, I have P, I have cupcakes. Well, in this next one, I don't have cupcakes. Okay? Therefore, I do have chocolate. Yay for chocolate. Okay, so I can have P, but I can't have Q. Here I don't have P, so I get Q. Make sense? Not too horrible, right? Okay, another set. I can have chocolate. Yay! Therefore, not cupcakes, not P. Or I can say I don't have cupcakes. No, sorry, what's Q? I don't have chocolate. Therefore, oops. Therefore, I have cupcakes. Okay? So keep in mind, any way this works out, I have to have one that is positive and one that is not. And then everybody's valid. All 4 of those are valid forms. If you want to check out Dr. Vaughn's version of this, look at the bottom of page 80. The review notes form gives you the 3: affirming the antecedent, denying the consequent, hypothetical syllogism. And then on page 83, he gets into a little box for the disjunctive syllogism. And then does some more things. Okay. Make sure when you're doing the homework that you're reading the instructions very carefully. 3.5 is basically tell me what the structure is. So give me the P's and Q's, and then tell me whether it's valid or not. Okay. In 3.7, you're looking at the same argument, the same structure that you figured out in 3.5, and then you're going to make up your own version of that same structure. Okay, so be very careful with those. Not horrible. Okay. So we've done the disjunctive syllogism. We've walked through all of those. I have one more thing to show you today, and then we'll be on our merry ways. And I'm going to get rid of everybody, because this is totally different. This particular aspect, this diagramming arguments, you can do this with any kind of argument, inductive or deductive, doesn't matter, because we're not as concerned with the underlying structure of the argument. We're looking at how the different sentences relate to the conclusion, okay? It's still a structure thing, but not quite as precise, okay? Which makes it easier for us to work with other pieces. So, if you're following along, page 86 in chapter 3, and there are a couple of things that you should know first. Okay, there are a couple of pieces. Oh, let me get this different color. We have dependent and independent premises. Okay, and basically the difference here is how well or if a particular premise stands on its own. Okay, in the little paragraph that he gives us on page 86 about Colonel Mustard, if you played Clue, understand how this works. Colonel Mustard has to be the one who was the murderer because of all these different things. Well, one of the things is that anybody who, in this case, bludgeons somebody with a candlestick, they're going to end up with some blood on their clothes. No way around it. He has blood on his clothes, so we can say he's the murderer. Okay, definitely he's the one who did it. If I take away either one of those two things, he has blood on his clothes, the murderer needs to have blood on his clothes, then the other one falls apart too. Those are dependent premises. And the way you do those in this particular aspect is to kind of put them together, 1 plus 2. Okay, either in parentheses or underline them, but the little plus is the key. Those two have to be joined together in order to work. All the others, even if the sentence before or after them is taken away, they can still stand on their own. They're independent. They don't need anybody else to be true or be useful. Okay, so that's the difference there. For this particular setup, what you have to do is, first of all, you need to go through and circle any of the indicator words. Okay, remember, indicator words aren't given. Sometimes they show up, sometimes they don't. When they show up, we're very excited because we have a therefore. We know that's our conclusion. We're good. If we don't have indicator words, we have to work a little bit harder. Doesn't mean there's not an argument. Okay, so step 1 is to circle the indicator words. Hopefully we get lucky. The second part of this is to number the sentences. Start with the first sentence, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, however high you got to go. Okay? We're not making any value judgments at this point. We're just numbering them. And the numbers are what we're going to use to then diagram the argument later on. Okay, the second thing we have to do, sorry, I got to look at my little page here. The second thing we have to do is find the conclusion. Okay, find the conclusion. I can spell conclusion. And we draw a wavy line under it. Okay? Easy stuff. If we don't have a conclusion, we don't have an argument. We're done. Okay? Third, find the premises. And just give them a regular underline. Now, premises aren't necessarily every sentence you're going to have in this particular argument. Okay? Some of them are going to be questions. Some of them might be exclamations or explanations. Others are repeated information. You only need it once, right? You can say he's the killer 5 times. You only need one of those. Okay? So find the premises, underline those. Okay? Fourth step. Cross out the extra stuff, the extraneous. Okay? So you're just going to take a line, cross out the extraneous stuff, anything that's not underlined, basically. These are the extra pieces, things we don't really need to understand and evaluate the argument. Okay? The fifth thing you do, this is the fun part, diagram the argument. Now, you have to think about how the different sentences relate to the conclusion and how the different sentences relate to each other. Okay? If you know, as with this one, if you know that you have dependent premises, they get linked, okay? Link with a plus. Not too bad. Independent premises by themselves. Sometimes you have an intermediate conclusion. A couple of sentences go together. Well, that means this, but that's not the conclusion. And you move on. Okay, so you're going to end up with something that looks like this. Okay, and that's a pretty basic argument. That's our Colonel Mustard argument. So you have a few things that work together to lead to the conclusion. You have a couple of other sentences that just tell us what about the conclusion, their support. The conclusion always goes at the bottom. Okay, premises up here. Okay, so not too hard. And basically, all you're trying to do here is to make sure you have your premises and conclusions and their relationships kind of graphically represented. Kind of shortcut again. You can use this with any kind of argument. It doesn't have to be deductive. Inductive argument, deductive argument, doesn't matter. Okay, because all we're worried about is which sentences in this paragraph actually support the conclusion. Okay, and that's pretty much it. What you're going to look at the homework, he's given you a few things in 3.8 where here, figure out these relationships and write yourself a little argument, okay? They're not too bad. Number 7's kind of mean. I don't think I assigned that one though. 3.9 is diagram the arguments, okay? So you have to go through the 5 stages. You can do those in the book. As long as you're telling me in number 2 and in number 3, what's the conclusion? Which sentences are the premises? So in number 2, okay, I'm going to do this in the book, but I'm going to say, find the conclusion. Okay, sentence number 3 is my conclusion. The premises are numbers 1, 2, 6, and 7. Okay, that's how I'm going to see it on homework. Not a big deal. Okay, so practice with these. He gives you 3 more examples, different kinds of arguments. Some of them are a little more interesting than others, but they're pretty good. So that should be a good ending for chapter 3. We are not going to go and do assessing log arguments. It's basically this, but instead of conclusion and premises, you have to make little summaries first and then put them all together. It's useful, but it takes quite a bit of time and energy, and this works really well, and we're just going to stick with that. Okay? So let me know if you have questions. Be happy to talk. Okay? Have a good day. And this time